Due to a technical setback, we apologize for the audio quality on this podcast.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and anybody listening for the first time. As always, we try and bring some big characters of the industry onto the show, and today we've got Larry Coyne. Many will know who Larry is, and for those who don't, I'm sure you're going to find it a very interesting session. So Larry, who's MD and owner of Coyne Airways, welcome, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's our pleasure, our pleasure. Now, Larry, your organisation has got a unique tag and a unique title. So whether it's from Mr. Foyle's reference as a NABA, non-asset-based airline, or as most people refer to it as the airline without aircraft, can you just give us a little bit of background from the early stages of '94 and what you were doing and why and how?
Yes, well, when I started out in the business, I knew absolutely nothing about it. A company I worked for went bust, and I had 2 kids at school, so I had to find some way of making a living. So I had a chance meeting with some Russians in London who'd come over to insure aircraft. And they said to me, this was, 4 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. And they said they had about 800 of these cargo planes available in Russia. And could I use them? And I said, well, I'll give it a try. So I started calling up people and trying to find work for them. And eventually I started getting calls from people who wanted to move freight into Central Asia. And at the time, there were a lot of flights into places like Baku and Georgia and so on. A lot of them were cigarette flights, I have to admit. In the first month or two, we really I had a rough time because I was working on my own. But I started to get going, and I think my first flight was on Valentine's Day in 1994, which was a flight to Almaty in Kazakhstan. And the business took off. I did 125 Aleutian flights the first year, and I did 400 the second year. So
not bad, Larry, not bad.
It was about 16,000 tons, and I did it in the second year. I had about 5 or 6 people. But I realized that there was an opportunity I was missing. And the opportunity was that the people who were chartering the aircraft weren't using the full capacity. We were carrying about 40 tons, we could carry 44 tons. So I asked the charterers if they would let me use the other 4 tons, and I reduced the price. And they resisted it for about 6 months, and eventually said, okay, all right, fine, we would need a lower price. So they let me do it. So I started to put freight on the back of the planes, going to places like Baku and so on. But I realized I didn't have an airway bill. So I started to apply for an airway bill, and then I tried to do interlines, to get the freight in from the States. And they said, well, you can't do that because you're not an airline. So I applied for my designator and airway billing code.
Yeah.
Took quite a bit of time, and the principal reason why I was granted both is because all the destinations I was flying to in Central Asia had airports with a very low level of tolerance for heavier aircraft. And I found out that the Russian aircraft, nearly all the Russian aircraft, had double the number of wheels that Western aircraft did. So they spread the pressure landing.
Yeah.
So even a small Western aircraft like a Boeing 737 couldn't land at these airports. So I made my case that I couldn't register an IL-76 on a European register, and I couldn't land Western aircraft. I was stuck. And they made an exception of me, and they gave me a designator and an airway billing code, and then I was all set.
Fair play, yeah. That's quite a creative way of getting around all the problems.
Yeah, and I didn't have to buy aircraft. One of the reasons why that was a good thing is I didn't have any money to buy anything. So I very quickly worked out. I mean, one of the other things that struck me is not knowing anything about the charter business was a real blessing, because when I started out, I started talking to people and they'd say, well, what you do is you ask the aircraft for the price and you add 5% and you give it to the customer. And that didn't work for us because the guys that we were asking to fly were Russian airlines. They didn't usually speak much English. They had no clue what fuel cost. They had no idea what landing and handling costs were. They had to buy catering for their crew because most of the aircraft had 8 or 9 guys on board.
Yeah.
I quickly established that either they overestimated the cost, in which case you lost it because you're too expensive, or they underestimated and they came back to me and said, oh, we lost money in the flight, can you give us more money? So what I decided to do was I actually worked out the prices with the airports. So I had a fixed level of costs and obviously variable costs like fuel. So I would say to them, just give me the cost of flying to Ostend. I'll take care of everything else. Tell me how many tons of fuel you need. And I was able to pinpoint the cost exactly, which meant that I was much more accurate in getting to the market. And I started winning loads of business because I was spot on. So that helped indeed as well.
I think there's many people could do with those sort of skills even now, Larry.
Well, I'm not sure I've got them. It's just that when you're stuck and you need to find a solution, you've got to say, all right, what can I do? This thing is actually hindering me. So let me figure a way around it. So I did something different.
It is. It's like Frontierland. Now, those particular challenges that you had then, I mean, the way our industry has now been totally tipped upside down, and the impact, you must have seen a huge amount now of opportunities as well as challenges as a result of this COVID virus.
Yeah, and we've actually changed our business as well, because I don't mind admitting we got a bit complacent and stale. We had a business that, certainly from the point of view of our Caspian business, was working with some fixed capacity. And the problem with that is that we filled up the capacity we had, and we kind of said, well, that's it, thank you, you can all go home now. And when COVID struck, that capacity was taken away from us. So what we did is we went out and we acquired new capacity with different carriers. We moved airports and we developed new destinations. And it's going much better than it was going before. And we now have, instead of just having a flight that goes one place that doesn't come back, we have two-way traffic. So we're moving freight all over the world, and we're moving freight from all over the world. So we got two-way business. So we got new markets, and it's much more exciting than the old business was.
And like how did you? Okay, so as soon as COVID happened, it was a shock to everybody, and it's a shock that I'm actually shocked that people were so shocked, because people should have seen it coming and they weren't prepared. So there was very little risk assessment, very little responsiveness, and whether it was out of fear, I don't know. But when you started to see the changes happening, what did you and your team actually do that was different?
Well, we had to put our thinking caps on and say, if this continues, we'll be out of business. We won't be able to buy. So we got to figure out what we can do and how we can do it differently. We had relationships with other airlines, and in fact, that's one of the nice things about being a non-asset-based airline. You can be friends with your competitors, or the big boys, because they see us as providing freight for them, not as someone taking away freight from them. So we had to develop those relationships and try and find suitable aircraft. And we find that our product, particularly into the Caspian, is made up of two very different types of freight. We had a lot of very big, very dense, ugly freight that was going to the oil fields in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of e-commerce and volumetric freight, like 7 or 7.5 to 1,
Yeah.
So we had a mixture of like 3-to-1 and 7-to-1, and it worked well. But then, as COVID struck, the oil and gas business took a big knock, as you know.
Yeah.
And development in the oil fields kind of reduced quite significantly. So the demand for air freight kind of went away. So we lost our very dense freight, which was really, as anyone in the airline business will tell you, dense freight is good, and volumetric freight is bad. So we were left with the volumetric stuff. So we had to come up with some solutions, and that we did.
And as far as the team were concerned, because one of the things that I think is a bit of a problem now is people haven't been used to dealing with crisis.
That's right.
And then when it comes, and the way that I think the way the media has performed is terrible, because everything is doom and gloom and it's negative, and everybody's finding the worst possible scenario or the worst possible outcome out of the current situations, instead of encouraging people to dig down, get stuck in, and try and come up with different solutions and different results.
No, my team performed very well. I think they realized that we were in for a very tough time, and that we had to become innovative and try and find solutions. And they worked very, very hard at that. It was a bit more difficult for, my daughter Liana runs our operation in Dubai, and she runs the African operation as well, which is all using other people's capacity. And the African business was hit very badly because as the passenger flights dropped, so did our business. So it was tough down there, but they too adapted, and they've decided to get involved in the charter business, which we kind of is where we started.
Yeah.
And they've been quite successful in running COVID charters out of China into Europe and into the Middle East and Africa. So they haven't done a huge number, but done enough to make up the difference and still keep the business going. So they faced a challenge, and we faced a challenge here in the UK as well for our Caspian business. And our business now, we would never go back to what we were doing pre-COVID. We're much happier with what we're doing now. And what I'm constantly saying to them, look, guys, we found this at a time of need because we were looking for it. How many more things are we missing because we're not looking for them?
Exactly. And sometimes it's that little bit of push that brings character and brings innovation and creativity out in people, and it's a real positive. Some of the things that people have done, not just in our industry but across all industries, is incredible.
Yeah, great opportunities come out of them because you look at something different and you discover something. I don't want to give away all my stuff.
Of course. But
our Caspian business was a one-way business. In other words, stuff went in there and nothing came out. Well, now we have a business going to the Caspian that has two-way freight, so we're getting very good exports from that market, which we weren't able to do because we didn't have a service coming out of there. And there was always a belief that, what the hell can you export from around the Caspian?
Yeah.
You don't manufacture anything, you have a bit of caviar and stuff like that. But we found now that we've tapped into a rich thing, a business that we never thought existed. And that's because we started looking differently, and we put the plane in, and it has to come back. So we say, what can we do with this? And we started then pushing and looking for business, and it's great.
Exactly, and it's to be applauded. Now, Larry, the other thing, you've seen now all the regulators and all the authorities. Everybody seems to be able to do things much quicker now, which is a godsend, and hopefully that's going to continue.
Well, yes, I think in general the regulators have been very good and very understanding. But I have to say that one of my pet hates is people in official government positions holding things up, and they're just I can't name them, but there are some that are very bad, and give you an example. You need to get certain certificates and documents and so on and so forth when you're doing flights. A very good example is the ACC3,
Yeah.
which you're bringing freight into the EU. You need to get that document. Now they have a system whereby if you want to do a flight like a charter, they'll give you 3 temporary ones. So you can get them more or less right away. But we had the situation where we got the 3 temporary ones, but we were told we couldn't have the permanent one for 5 weeks, 5 more weeks, and we couldn't have any more temporary ones. And we were looking at a loss of revenue from that bit of bureaucracy alone of $150,000 to us. That was the cost to us of that stupidity. And we could do nothing about it. We tried everything. We haven't finished on that one yet because I'm not going to give up on that one.
Exactly.
Try and make sure that public bodies, and this is a government department, being petty. It's nothing else, just being petty.
Yeah.
And if I name them, they'll have a go with me. So I'm not going to mention who they are.
Yeah, no. A wise decision, Larry. I think a wise decision.
Yeah.
But you have to keep battling at it because it doesn't make sense. And the more that people keep pushing, the more that things will change, hopefully. And this collaboration to help everybody, because it's a global issue, it's got to be understood.
Yeah. So I'm very happy. I have very good relations with the official bodies around the Caspian, the civil aviation in Armenia, in Georgia, Kazakhstan. They're all accessible. I can call them up and discuss things with them, which is not so easy in Europe, but they are genuinely trying to do good for their country. They're trying to actually get some business going and make sure that they're not the ones holding anything up.
Yeah.
And I'm very impressed with the level of support I'm getting in those areas.
Yeah, it's funny. I was in Spain for a few days last week, and I was so surprised at how well and how structured and how pleased all of the authorities. As soon as you land in the airport, it was superb. Everybody wearing masks, everybody paying attention to guidelines and rules, and it came as a bit of a shock then when I came back into the UK.
Well, you're touching on a kind of a sensitive point because the Brits and the Americans have had the worst, the highest number of casualties, and they've handled this virus thing badly. And when you look at what's happening here and what's happening in America, how poor they have been at implementing common sense solutions to the problem, you can see why it occurred here. And some of the nations, particularly the Asian countries, are much better at getting things done that have to happen than we are here. And maybe it's because we're all individualists and it's eccentric Brits or whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but it's more difficult to get us to do things that are good for us than say in other countries.
I agree. And what I don't understand, Larry, is sometimes all people want is to be told what to do and why.
Yeah.
And then when you get all these ministers, and even I was listening to some of the news yesterday, and they're coming out with, but we like people to look at it from their own perspective and take the common sense, and we feel that people will do the right thing. Well, people don't.
No.
And the sooner people start to be given these directives, especially with the masks, I find it amazing that somebody doesn't say, I'm sorry, every single public area, you've got to wear a mask. Absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
And that common sense is well hidden, I think, in most places.
Well, since we talked about masks, I think there's going to be quite a continued demand for PPS.
Yeah.
And I think that if for example we have to wear a mask in this country or in America, I mean that's a hell of a lot of air freight involved in that. And one of the things I got involved in was looking at bidding for some of this business. Now, there was a time when you couldn't get a 747 from China to Europe for less than about $1 million. That price has come down quite dramatically. But what happened is a lot of the passenger carriers who had these 777s and very large passenger aircraft sitting around, which had huge belly capacity, they called. And they went in there and stole a lot of that business away because they were able to say, well, we can fly to China for $200,000 say, and we can actually make some money. You know, we can charge $400,000 and make some money.
Yeah, the freighters.
Yeah, the freighters. Yeah. Well, the price has come down, and obviously, one of the things that's been very helpful is that the low cost of fuel. So fuel has been very, very helpful in that regard. And I think if the fuel price goes up and the charter price comes down, I think that a lot of the passenger carriers will find it more difficult to make a living out of the freight business.
Yeah, yeah. And I've been talking to some people who were talking, and they termed it as their ethical pricing mechanism. So they were offering different prices if it was PPE as opposed to standard cargo. Mm-hmm. And that's it's a nice thing. And I think I agree with you that the prices were going so high that people would start to turn their nose up, and they'd start to look at it a little bit differently because it was given the wrong message.
Yeah. Well, I'm quite pleased that the passenger carriers were able to get some revenue from that business because they certainly needed it. I'm not sure how good that business is today because the price is probably down at least 50%, if not more.
Yeah, no, exactly.
If you have an aircraft, if you have a 777, and let's say you're paying an ACMI rate of $6,000 an hour for it, and you're sitting there doing nothing. If you can cover the cost of fuel and get $3,000 or $4,000 back in the ACMI, why not do it?
Yep.
And they can't afford to price marginally. So there's an opportunity for them to stay in the game.
Yeah. No, I think everybody is opening their eyes now to how flexible things can be, but also how important cargo is to the overall results.
Yeah.
Suddenly cargo is not, the push them into the corner, only talk to them when you need to. They're starting to get a little bit of their own character and personality in an airline now.
Well, I think people, cargo really had a bad reputation because people didn't realize how important cargo aircraft were to their livelihood. Because I know 50% of all cargo goes in the bellies of passenger planes, but a lot of freight can only go on freighters.
Yeah.
And I think people are beginning to realize that my holiday flight is more important than that cargo flight. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. No, there's a newfound understanding now of how important it is just to keep things going, the supply chain, that everybody steps outside their door and expects to happen. Now people are a lot more aware. So it's fair play to everybody for being involved in that. Now, Larry, moving forward, and there's lots of talk of a second wave, and also the way certain countries are behaving, and now there's going to be blockades against areas that are not performing the way other countries feel they should. How do you feel that's going to map out now? Because I think there's a crucial period between the end of the summer in the Northern Hemisphere and probably March, April of next year.
Well, it's until we can see things turning around. I mean, this weekend I heard on the radio or the television that we had the maximum number of new infections that we've had to date. Now, either you turn the corner and it's the number of infections start coming down, or you keep on climbing. They're not going to stay the same. That'd be too good. But if you look at the rate of infections in Europe compared to the US, it's 10 to 1 in the US compared to Europe. Now, the Europeans have, and indeed a lot of the Asian countries have managed to get a grip of it. And I think until governments around the world, everyone gets a grip of it, it's still going to be there, and it has the ability to come back at any time. So we're living in a kind of a bit of a nervous world. We're not quite sure which way it's going to go. We'd all like to think it's over. We'd all like to say back to work, go to the pub, have a drink, get out, exercise, and so on. But there are inherent dangers in that. But I think people are becoming more sensible about not taking risks. I know I'm in a high risk category, so I have to be very careful where I go, because I'm sure if I got COVID, it would probably finish me off. So I have to be very, very careful. So, but I know that people are taking it more seriously now. There's some categories of people who think, well, it's not going to kill me. Only 1% die. And if I get it, I'll probably get immune antibodies.
Yeah.
But that's not turning out to be the case. I mean, they reckon now only about 7 to 10% people develop antibodies. No one knows how long they're going to last. And you're right, we could see a new wave in the fall and maybe spring of next year. We've no idea where it's going. I think we've got to plan for the worst and carry on being very vigilant.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert in any way or form, but just from data-driven decision making and seeing how things are going, I think it's fair to estimate what will happen. I'm convinced there's going to be a second wave, and it's going to be quite a tough one. But what I'm also very positive about is that people should have learned an awful lot from what they didn't do the first time round, and that's what people should take comfort in. However, it's some of the silly areas that seem to drag down the bigger successes that we have. And what you were saying about bureaucracy and administration and common sense, in some cases, really big steps forward have been taken. And then it's the communication and the information, some of the smaller administrative controls that seem to be so lagging. That's where I think people now need to focus a lot on their own risk assessment, their own mitigating actions, and what they'll do in the worst case scenario.
I agree. I think you make a very good point, Chris.
And the other thing, Larry, what I wanted to ask you is, how are you seeing the responses from all the handling agents that you're dealing with now on your routes?
Pretty good. I mean, we're now operating out of Liege in Belgium, and that's a very busy airport.
Yeah.
Incredibly busy airport, and full credit to them, because they've done a wonderful job in attracting airlines there. The downside of that, the more successful you are, the busier it is, and you get your trucks waiting and God knows what else. But we're very happy there, and we find that the agents, the ground handling agents, are really doing a great job trying to make sure everything carries on.
Yeah, I think Stephen Verhasselt and all of his colleagues will be very pleased with that reference there, Larry.
Well, Stephen is I think he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, me too.
He is the most helpful guy you could ever possibly meet. And I'm sure any other, if I was the boss of another airport, I'd go and I'd look for a transfer.
Yeah.
He's so good at what he does.
He is. He's brilliant, and he's got such a great attitude. He's got a great sense of humour, and nothing seems to faze him.
Absolutely, no, he's fantastic.
Larry, when we were speaking about handling and also the GHAs, some people have been in touch with us, and they've been commenting on the fact that they were a little bit concerned about the lack of ongoing training and employees meeting their licensing requirements. Do you think that's having an effect, or do you think it's something that should be looked at a lot more closely? Because in some areas, the numbers of incidents and damage or FOD issues, etc., have started to increase.
Well, we haven't we haven't had any issues in that regard. The issues we have are relating to what they call weekend working. And no matter how hard we try to get enough people to be on duty at the weekend, they say to us, we can't get enough people. People don't want to work at the weekend. Even in areas of relatively high unemployment, people say, no, we don't want to work at the weekend. And so we struggle sometimes at weekends in our ground handlers having sufficient labor to take care of the job. Now, I wouldn't know about things like licenses and safety and so on. We assume all of that is there, but we have no way of checking it.
Okay, and as far as audits or checklists, do you guys actually do any of that yourselves?
We do, and we have people that we hire to come and be present at the airport during loadings and stuff like that to make sure everything is done properly. But we haven't really had too much of a problem. But don't forget, we don't have a huge number of flights, and we don't have vast amounts of freight. But we have, for example, we're nearly always flying just once a week, and our problem is sometimes the ground handling crew don't realize that if you miss one flight, it's a 2 weeks flight. And if it's in transit, it could be 2.5 weeks, and you can't call that a proper service.
Yeah.
We put huge emphasis on not leaving freight behind, but it's a struggle because things, get lost, and sometimes they forget. You get a difference between the manifest and what's on the aircraft, and that's worrying. We haven't had that problem in Liege to date, but we've had it at other airports.
Okay, right. Again, another good endorsement there for Liege.
Yeah,
you're going to be greeted with God knows what next time you go in there, Larry.
Steve will have to buy me loads of beers.
I think he will. Yeah. Now, Larry, what do you think are your biggest challenges now for the next 12 months?
Well, I think that we're going to see a softening in yields. I think yields are going to fall back quite a lot. Because, and why do I say that? Well, the fuel price is low. There's a lot of capacity around chasing, there's a lot less freight, a lot more capacity. And people are hungry, and the principal way they compete is price.
Yeah.
So I can see yields coming down, and if yields come down, margins will tighten, and some companies will be thrown into losses. And like any industry, we don't know how long companies can go on making losses. I can tell you one thing: we will probably go on longer than most other airlines because we don't have any assets.
Yeah, exactly.
We did. I think they call it the asset test. There was a lot of talk about that during the financial crisis in 2008, and I remember some of the big international carriers saying that the asset test gave them 6 to 8 weeks before they could last with their present cash. So that can show you how close to the edge a lot of airlines live. The main reason for that is that these aircraft cost an awful lot of money. I mean, if you're paying $6,000 per flying hour and you've committed to 16 hours or 15 hours a day, you're paying $90,000 even if the plane's sitting on the ground, and multiply that by all the planes that are sitting on the ground. And it's no wonder, these airlines are having to fire tens of thousands of people. We don't have that. So we don't have that drain on our resources, but we too need business. Otherwise, we're living off our past earnings.
Yeah, but it's a terrible thing, isn't it? And the industry itself, I mean, prior to COVID, was going through, I think, a very, very dangerous period where the margins were narrower than ever before, and in some cases, people were taking contracts for the sake of of market share, and making sure that they keep certain customers. And I think all of that has got to be rethought and changed now. And if you're not making a cost plus return on the contract, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I think that the ideals that, oh yeah, we need to keep this, it's wrong. And that's the sad reality now of why so many businesses are having to, whether you call it downsize, right size, or common sense practical sizing. It has to be done. And as tough as it is on people, if they don't make tough decisions now, there's going to be even more casualties over the next 12 to 18 months, which is a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's awful. When I see the numbers, are colossal.
Oh.
And if you bear in mind that the breadwinner probably is supporting another 2 or 3 people, maybe wife and kids or something like that. So you multiply 10,000 people being fired, it's probably 30,000, depending on those jobs.
Yep.
So, and one of the things we try to do is obviously hang on to our people and look after our people as best we can. And it's probably easier for us to do it without the aircraft. So not having the aircraft is a great blessing. And I remember once giving a presentation in Seoul. It was a crowded house, and I was explaining what I did, and we had no aircraft. And one guy in front stood up. He said, "Mr. Coyne," he said, "thank you very much, a lovely presentation. But he said, I hope you get enough money to buy yourself an aircraft." And I said to him, "You completely missed the point. I don't want the aircraft. I want them to use them and give them back after the flight, but not to own them."
Yeah, yeah, and it's that understanding that people, they just assume that airlines are making money all the time, and it's such a tough world to be in now.
Yeah, I think in a way we got carried away with, pushing too many aircraft.
Yeah, forecasting and growth and everything's going to be perfect. Nothing is perfect for all the time.
Yeah, and so we've just got far too much capacity. If you look at most airlines now, they have more aircraft than they need. And there used to be a time, where you could hand them on, and they went to smaller airlines and to poorer parts of the world. But everyone's in it now, because a lot of the countries, even the poorer countries, have very modern fleets of aircraft.
Yeah.
And all the aircraft are no longer needed.
Yeah. And it's amazing now how consultants and analysts are looking at the different types of strategy and tactics and models that carriers had, whether they erred on the side of the 380s and the larger aircraft to the smaller, more flexible fleets. And that's going to come up, I think, very, very soon as to who they think was the wiser and what's the best way moving forward.
Well, I suppose if it's any good thing that comes out of it, and I hope something good comes out of it, is that we should be seeing a much lower cost base for aircraft in the future. But I think, if you're a leasing company and you've leased out 200 aircraft and you bought them at top dollar and you had to charge $6,000 an hour, you'd be worried, wouldn't you? You'd say, yeah, what's happening there? People start giving them back or going bust. And something's got to give. There's got to be some give in the system to take account of what's happening.
Yeah, no, definitely. And whilst I asked you what you thought were the challenges, etc., what do you think are the positives that have come out of this for the industry and people themselves that you'd like to see continue a long time after?
Well, it's a little bit like restaurants. They got very cocky, and you couldn't get a table. But now they've had 3 or 4 months where no one's been going in there. That they know they've got to make a living, and they're going to be nice to people again, because customers are important. And I think our industry kind of lost that. I mean, some companies did a great job in making people feel welcome, but the general view was, you weren't treated very well. Let me tell you about one slight complaint I have. Because we don't have planes, and we do a lot. We pay for a lot of interlines. We get all our business. We get freight from America, Japan, China, all over the world to cut into our hub so we can put it in our flight. Now, interline business is the poor cousin. They treat interline business badly. They leave it off. They charge you a high price. They don't think much of it. You know, so you get treated badly. I mean, if you're a small company and you're buying interline space from the major carriers, I think that a lot of them are beginning to show new respect for its business.
Yep.
What we pay for our interline is a lot more than forwarders pay for their space, and forwarders get free tickets and they get all kinds of things, and we get our freight left behind. So I'm hoping that they're going to show a new respect for the people who pay them good money to move freight.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think across the board, Larry, I've had people now over the last 2 weeks saying how long they've had to wait for cargo. And, when people come to they come onto the doors, they're not very happy. They're miserable. I can understand people's fears and anxieties, but at the end of the day, and you said it rightly, you said there may be 2 or 3 or 4 people relying on every person who's got a job. If they don't do enough to make sure that everybody wants to come back to their company, they're going to be added to that list. So this attitude and engagement and understanding and appreciation of what people want, that's got to start coming back in an abundance. It's got to make people realize that the reason I'm in this job is because of what I'm doing for the customer that I'm serving.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of that around, but because people, it hasn't hit them yet. If you haven't lost your job, and I don't mind admitting, I lost a couple of jobs, but it was the making of me. It made me say, God, what could I have done differently? Why has this happened to me?
Yeah.
And I think it's a healthy thing that people, not too often, once they learn that being laid off, once you lose your job, it's terrible. It's an awful feeling, especially if you have dependents. Yeah. So I think that it should make people more aware and more careful about the job they have. Even if, it's common. Most people working in companies, they complain all the time about their boss and the company and the policies and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, they're very well looked after. And it's only when they don't have a job that they'll realize what they've missed. So I'm hoping that we're going to see higher service levels in the future.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And we also had a guest on who made a valid point. He said, why do people always criticize success or find something wrong with success? To the degree where some people almost are ashamed of reporting their successes because people have a pop at them. And if you don't have successful people, you don't have so many opportunities and so many jobs. And people should be really pleased that their organizations are successful in getting back into making money, because then there's opportunities for others. And not all this negativity about how much and what do they do with that money. The most important thing now for companies is sustainability and continuity. So they have to now look at how long they can last because of this terribly tough lesson that everybody's learned in these last 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, sadly, the way that will help them last longer is by offloading staff. That's the reality, because they overheads, they've got, like most companies, got a level of overheads that's far too great for the level of business they got at the present time. And at the same time, whilst those companies are trying to keep as many people as they possibly can, there's another voice saying, unless we cut our overheads, we won't survive. So you end up, being good for no one. No survivors at all, rather than downsizing and having a company half the size for some people, as opposed to having nothing. So
exactly.
It's a tough one for bosses who have to make these decisions.
Oh, terribly, terribly tough. Yeah, and I've also been watching now some of the options where companies are offering that their employees share the pain up front and then benefit from the gain afterwards. So instead of having a 20 or a 25% reduction in staff numbers, they have a 25-30% reduction in time worked and a reduction in salaries, and then they're willing to make it up if the business survives and then goes on to success.
Well, that seems sensible to me.
Yeah.
If the name of the game in business is survival. If you can survive, then it's good for you and your employees. There's no point making decisions that are going to ultimately lead to everyone losing their job. So any kind of innovative scheme, whether it's working a shorter week or whatever, but the companies have got to find a way to carry on.
Indeed.
I think, when you read in the paper how so many companies are about to chuck in, they won't survive. I have a feeling that a lot of people who've been furloughed, when they go back to work, may find it very difficult, and the companies may find it very difficult to keep paying them. I hope they do, but I just have a feeling that we haven't seen the worst yet.
Yeah, no, it's very tough times, and it's also, how to keep people still associated with the industry that they love and they worked in, so that when things do start to come back in a couple of years, that they're the first ones that come back, because, as you know, our industry is so focused on such regulatory training and criteria, and it's hard to get those experienced people again.
Yeah, it is. No, we should try and hang on to people we've got, because every time we look at hiring new people, you have from outside the industry, it's a long road to get them up to a level where they're effective and contributing. You can't do it in 3 months or 6 months. Probably you're talking a year to 2 years to get them properly trained.
Exactly. So, yeah, we need to keep everybody in the family still associated with the family, so that when it comes back with a sense of opportunity. Now, Larry, since 1994, and from what you said, you didn't know anything about the business and you weren't sure what to do. You've done very well as a nabber. So I'm sure that there's going to be many, many years to come. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Okay, wishing you well. And it's good to see a different approach within the industry that can also maintain its success amongst all the other traditional bodies.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed the session. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I will continue to work in the industry for as long as I possibly can. And it's great to have characters like your good self, who've been around a few years, still fighting for the industry. And I'm sure you'll be around for quite a long time too.
Oh, please God, I hope to be, sir. Please God, I hope to be, as with yourself and everybody else. So thank you again, and take care, keep well, and really appreciate your time, Larry.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.